Hey everyone, it's Rachel, and today we're going to take a look at the Jami. Before we get into the review, I just want to mention that this is not a sponsored video. I bought the Jami myself when it was on sale a couple of months ago for $350, so this is my honest review. So what is the Jami? The Jami set out to be an all-in-one travel guitar that can break down to fit in a backpack, that can be played like an actual guitar with real steel strings, that can be used as a MIDI instrument, that can be played both through headphones, through a built-in jack on the instrument, and also through an amp, and really it just set out to be a lot of different things. A guitar that could successfully do everything that the Jami set out to do would be a really magical instrument, but is the Jami a magical guitar? Unfortunately, at this time, it really isn't. It falls short of its promises in many ways. But it definitely has some really cool uses, and I'll get into those as well as the not so cool things in this review. So first, a general overview of the guitar. What's really cool about this guitar, and one of the reasons I was interested in it, is that it can split in half, which allows it to fit inside a luggage or a backpack, so it's really easy to take with you. And it's pretty simple to do. There's just a latch on the back here, and you just kind of hold that down and then pull it off, and there you go. The guitar is now split in two, and that is really cool. Although being able to split the guitar in half is super cool and it makes it very portable, I love the idea of it, it does end up causing a bunch of the problems with this as a guitar because it doesn't actually function or play like an actual guitar. It can't work like an actual guitar because the strings that you're fretting with your fretting hand are different than the set of strings that you're picking with your picking hand. So that means when you're playing on this guitar, everything is done through a combination of sensors and playing back audio samples. I don't know entirely how this works, but it is very different than an actual guitar, and it definitely sounds that way. More importantly than the sound though, it also affects the playing and playability of this as a guitar, and I'll get into that in a moment. Outside of the neck and the fretting area, the guitar also has a modular body that consists of 3 different parts that you put together and attach the guitar. It's really simple to do and definitely compact enough to bring with you wherever you're going. Overall, I actually really like how the guitar looks. It looks kind of cool, kind of futuristic and retro at the same time. It does feel a little bit cheap because it's made of plastic, but that is understandable because of the way the parts work and how it has to be disassembled. On the bottom of the guitar, you have an output jack here, so you can play it through an amp. You also have a headphone jack, so you can play through headphones, and there's also a USB-C port, which is how you'll charge this guitar, and also how you use it as a MIDI controller. There's also a volume knob here, which you can use to adjust the onboard sound volume. You can also tap it to control some of the onboard effects and how they sound. There's also a kickstand that you can put in and pull out, so you can play it more comfortably on your lap. And finally, there is a power button on the side of the guitar here, and every time you use it, you'll have to turn on the guitar, and it will take about 10 to 15 seconds to calibrate before you can actually touch it, and that's a bit annoying, but not the worst thing. Once you have the guitar powered on, you'll want to connect it to their mobile app, and in that app, you'll be able to change a lot of different things. You can adjust settings, you can update the firmware of the guitar, which is pretty important because they've made a bunch of improvements and hopefully will continue to do so. There's different presets for tones. You can change between electric and acoustic. You can also change the tuning of the instrument so that it sounds like whatever tuning you want. So in theory, this all sounds great. You have an instrument that you can take anywhere, that you can make sound like any guitar you want, that you can change tunings on the fly, that you can plug into headphones and just play without being connected to anything, that you can plug it to an amp. It all sounds great, but here is where we run into some of the issues with using the Jami as a practice guitar, or just a guitar in general. As I mentioned before, the Jami is a digital guitar, so it doesn't play like an actual guitar with pickups. Everything you play is done through software and sensors and trying to figure out what you're doing on the guitar. And this is where the Jami starts to struggle a bit. When I first got the Jami a few months ago, its tracking was really not that great. You could play simple single note melodies or simple chords and it would do pretty well there, but if you started to pick up the speed at all, it would have a lot of drop notes and sometimes there's notes ringing out that you didn't actually play. Since then, due to some firmware updates, the tracking has gotten better. It has gotten better at handling fast single note melodies, but it's still not perfect, and regardless of what you're playing, there will still be many instances where the Jami doesn't do what you expect with your playing, whether it's drop notes or other issues with guitar techniques that I will get into shortly. For the sake of this demo, I'm just using the default electric guitar clean sound that is built in on the app. So for example, here's a relatively slow part of a scale. So you can see it did pretty well there, but there were a few notes where it kind of felt like it cut off too soon, and I experienced this a bunch, and that is probably due to the muting sensitivity. The Jami does try to handle both fretting hand and palm muting on the strings, so you can stop the notes when you want to, but in practice it doesn't really work that well. And you can configure things like this and general sensitivity in the settings in the app. It's just very hard to configure it to work well, and I spent a bunch of time trying that out before reverting to the factory settings because it was just hard to make it do what I wanted it to do. If I made it more sensitive because it wasn't ringing out when I picked the note, then it would be overly sensitive and ring out way too much when I didn't even touch the string, and things like that. And maybe there is some way to perfectly configure it, but it isn't easy and it's not done perfectly right off the bat. Let me just try playing some fast stuff really quick and see how that goes. So while it did do pretty well, actually, a lot better than it used to on playing fast notes, there are just a couple of notes that get dropped, and it's kind of just tricky to practice on because you don't know if you should trust that it was you making a mistake or if it was the guitar's tracking. Now, one cool thing in theory about the Jami, despite it being a not real guitar since it has a split in the middle and it's digital, it does try to emulate a bunch of the most popular guitar techniques so that you can play them on it as well. Now, the thing is, most of these techniques don't really feel like they work most of the time, and they don't really feel like they do on an actual guitar, so it's more of the same thing I was just talking about, where you don't know if it's you messing up or the guitar, and a lot of times it is the guitar making a mistake with its tracking. So for example, it has sliding, and as you can see, it's not working all of the time, it's working some of the time. It's just really unreliable, and you don't know when it's going to actually work. You can try to play really, really deliberately, but that's not something you want to try to do when you're trying to practice guitar and guitar skills that you will be carrying over to an actual guitar. You should expect things like that to just work on a real guitar, and it doesn't work most of the time on the Jami. And this is much the same with hammer-ons and pull-offs. They only kind of work some of the time, and maybe if you do it very deliberately, they will work, but they won't work as you're used to on a real guitar. It's just hard to practice an actual song on this when the techniques that you're used to working don't really work most of the time, or at least feel unreliable. It also has palm muting, which works decently well, probably better than most of the other techniques on the guitar. There's also tapping, but I've never really been able to get it to work very well. Another important technique that you use all the time is vibrato, and it does have vibrato. It just doesn't sound very natural to me. There's also bending, but again, don't really like how it sounds. It does work most of the time, but not all of the time, and you can configure in the app how much you want to be able to bend, whether it's just one half step, a whole step, or more. Also, if you want to try bending further up the fretboard, it doesn't really work for me, and I haven't been able to get it to work. Just no bending, nothing down there. So overall, even though it can be decent at tracking quick playing and playing chords, power chords, things like that, it's these instances of unreliability where you're just not sure how it's going to react that makes it a lot less fun to play than a real guitar. It also makes it tricky to use for practice or if you're doing anything in a live setting, because you really want it to be reliable so that you can actually play how you want it to sound, and if you're practicing, so that you can actually judge how your playing is going and what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. For my testing, changing the sensitivity settings in the app drastically from where they start at the default levels can help to improve how these techniques are picked up, so the slides and hammer-on pull-offs will get picked up much more consistently, but doing so comes with other issues. If you increase the sensitivity settings a lot to help improve these techniques, then your strings might just kind of ring out a lot more than they should be, and it will sound noisy overall. Basically, if you get the Jami and you want to be able to play it well, you can expect to spend a decent amount of time in the app just tweaking sliders up and down and testing it out and seeing if it has improved or worsened the experience. And that experience of having to do all this tweaking to get the instrument to work like you want it to isn't a great one. But if you maybe didn't really care about those things, maybe you just wanted to compose something on the go and be able to have access to an instrument when you don't have any other way to have a guitar with you, it could work in that scenario. One other thing that I'm not a huge fan of are the built-in sounds that come with the guitar. There's a bunch of high gain sounds and they all sound pretty fizzy and unnatural, so not a huge fan of those. Let me just show you a couple of those right now. So here's the Glam Metal one. Here's Romantic Goth. Noisy shoegazing. That's a weird one. Rock Ballad. Not that bad. 90s metal. So yeah, I think you get the idea. I'm not a huge fan of how most of those presets sound, but if you want a different sound, one thing that's cool is you can plug it into an amp through the jack here, and you can put it on the clean sound and then run whatever sound your amp has, and that I like a lot better. It's a lot more fun for me that way, and I like how it sounds that way too. But one thing that is pretty cool with this is that even though those tones aren't my favorite, they are built into the guitar. So that means if you're on the go, you don't need an amp, you can just plug your headphones in and you have all the tones on the guitar. You can just shuffle with the button there and you can play with different tones and just play with your headphones and this guitar. So that is pretty cool. It's definitely a really portable solution and I love the idea of it. But outside of being a portable guitar, there is another area where this instrument actually really shines now as is, and that is as a MIDI controller for MIDI instruments. Outside of it being a portable guitar, one of the reasons I was interested in getting the Jami was because of this capability, and it is actually very cool. Basically, all you have to do is plug it into your computer using the included USB-C cable, and then you can use it in your DAW or recording program as a MIDI controller. Now, if you're someone like me who is primarily a guitar player and is not super familiar with keyboards or other instruments, it is really cool because it allows you to use the same chords and notes and just playing style you're used to on a guitar to play a bunch of other instruments that you've never played before. Now the Jami is pretty unique in this category. There aren't many guitar MIDI controllers, and especially ones with steel strings that kind of play and feel like an actual guitar for the most part. So it's a pretty niche market of people who would want to buy this for that purpose. But if you are interested in a guitar MIDI controller, it could be worth checking this out. So I have the Jami plugged in now to the computer, and I have Reaper open up with a synth library, and we can just try it out and see what kind of sounds we can make with the Jami as a MIDI controller. So I have Astro Piano selected. It's really pretty cool to be able to play piano sounds on a guitar-like instrument. It doesn't always do what you expect it to do, but that kind of adds to the creativity a bit. Let's try an organ out. It's pretty cool. So there are some noises that will ring out because the tracking isn't perfect and sometimes it's overly sensitive, like on the guitar mode, but when you're recording MIDI, I find that it doesn't matter quite as much because it's really easy to just edit out the notes that you don't want. So in this case, I don't consider any tracking mistakes to be deal breakers really, because you can just edit them out, and it allows you to be a lot more creative in a different way than usual using an instrument that you're used to. What about some strings? That's a lot of fun, and I could really see using this as a writing tool to incorporate into future songs, because you can do things like that you wouldn't normally do with a guitar and wouldn't be able to come up with without using a keyboard on this, and it's a lot of fun. So overall, if you are looking for a travel guitar that will play like an actual guitar, that will be able to handle techniques like a real guitar, and that will be able to be consistent for practice and live playing, the Jami is not that guitar, at least not yet. But if you are a guitarist who is way more comfortable with the fretboard than a keyboard, and you're looking to get into using virtual or MIDI instruments, the Jami might be worth considering. I think the Jami right now is a bit expensive and a bit niche for most people right now at its retail price of $500, although I did get it for $350 on sale, and it is often on sale for $450 as well. Overall, I love the ideas behind the Jami guitar. I love that it can break down to fit in a piece of luggage or a backpack, and I also really like the MIDI functionality, but I think that it needs some work before it is ready to be a truly travel on-the-go solution for most guitarists out there. I'll leave a link in the description if you might be interested in checking out the Jami for yourself, and if you already have a Jami, definitely let me know in the comments what you think of it and how you use it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review of the Jami guitar, and I will see you in the next video.